Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. I graduated St. Martin's like 12 years ago now. And at the time, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a type designer. Of course, I'm going to do Cyrillic because it's my native script. And I had this like naive idea that I could just draw letters and there would no be politics involved. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and it hasn't been the case ever, but certainly not the case nowadays. So let's start with the basics. I mean, I know I'm talking to mostly educated type designers, but you would be surprised how often I had to explain what Cyrillic is. So Cyrillic is a script. It's not a language, and it was originally used as a writing system for Slavic languages. That's in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe. So before Cyrillic was invented, Greek was used to write the old Slavic languages. And like Cyrillic means nowadays very different things to all the countries that use that, which is more than 50 countries actually. But I kind of can't really ignore I think it's important for you to understand a little bit of the historical context. So there's always this big question and big argument about who created Cyrillic. And I always really worry about giving this lecture and who am I giving it to and who is going to tell me off afterwards. So Cyrillic comes from the name Cyril. And Cyril is the guy with the black beard. And the other one is Methodius. So these guys, Cyril and Methodius, they were Byzantium scholars who around 1800 were invited by Moravia to create a new script. But that's when it becomes really confusing because Cyrillic is named after Cyril, but they actually invented the Glagolitic script. So this is how the Glagolitic script kind of looks like. It's also extra confusing because they're always like portrayed holding the Cyrillic script, but yeah. So that's the really good part. So Glagolitic looked like this, and it was unfortunately very short-lived script. I mean, it persisted only in Croatia, in the church, but you know there was a reason why. I guess it didn't really persist. Besides, purely visually compared to what people were used to, which was the Greek. This Glagolitic was overly complex and somehow didn't catch on. So then, after, like, Cyril and Methodius had a bunch of students, and after Moravia fell apart, the students fled to the neighboring countries, like nowadays Bulgaria, and it was their students that were invited by this wonderful Bulgarian ruler to come to the Bulgarian monasteries. And during that time, there was also Bulgarians were pagans, kind of, I would say, not the right word, but maybe. So they were, it was a time when there was lots of Christianization. It was like around 800. And these people, called the 7 monks, 7 students of Cyril and Methodius, they are supposedly invented Cyrillic. But the thing is, the thing is, that this Cyrillic was now like it's a new script. They used what Cyril and Methodius like kind of come up with in terms of analyzing the language, figuring out what letters were missing from Greek so that they would be adequate script for the Slavic languages, and that's what they come up with. And it was very similar to what in terms of style to what already people were used to with Greek. But still, we're talking about a time when very few people were actually reading or writing, and it's all about monks in the monasteries, and not so much like the general public. So we're skipping a lot because it's a short lecture, but I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the few writing styles that exist in Cyrillic. And so Ustav, which is basically the equivalent of uncial, looks like this, similar to the Greek Ustav, similar to the Greek uncial. And for many, many decades, this is how Cyrillic looked like. It was just in religious books, kind of formal, and yeah, formal for religious. There's no uppercase, vertical contrast, lots of accents. Those were the, and then comes the semio stuff, with the pulu stuff, which is kind of like a slightly when the script starts to be used by much more people, not just a few monks in a few monasteries, then the pulu stuff becomes more popular. See, like, it's just a less formal version of the U stuff, and it gets to a much less, like, more casual way of writing. Maybe just less contrast, but yeah, some examples here. So it's written with different rules, and there's no distinguishable rules of contrast. It's not, certainly not same as what Latin had. And then there's also scoropis, which is particularly popular in, like, Ukraine, of course, and it's very, like, expressive, lots of ligatures, very interesting. I also can't read that. I mean, it's like but there's, like, a lot of variation, and I always really enjoy looking at those. You can see here, like, all the versions of G, which is just one letter. Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so yeah, it starts at this point to be a lot less formal because, again, more people are using it. There's huge variety of shapes, and what I can only identify as crazy contrast is, like, yeah. So this is, like, a nice view of the three. It's like pulu stuff, ustav, pulu stuff, and scoropis. And you can see, like, a mix of styles being used, and this is, like, early printing, and you also saw a little bit of this one as the titling one. I'm referring to the one in the red. It's Vyas, which kind of translates as like a knitted letters. I mean, there's similar things in Latin manuscripts as well, but I think it's really cool. Lots of, again, a lot of ligatures, a lot of titling, and there have been quite a few experiments and research recently to make that kind of a script happen. So decorative things. I'm showing you these because they are at the point of history where Cyrillic is developing, but without it being influenced by Latin still. So yeah, really nice examples. And then comes the civil type. And there's like so much emotional, I would say, so much feelings about this reform in the Cyrillic world. But the Russian ruler, Peter the Great, he decides that he doesn't want to use this like old style Cyrillic anymore because he wants to be modern, a modern ruler, and basically he wants to limit the he wants to limit the church influence. So he commissions a bunch of Dutch punch cutters, and Dutch punch cutters, you know, famous for doing the best work that we know in Latin, did not do a very good job with Cyrillic, mostly because they didn't know what they were doing. But yeah, supposedly these are the sheets that, you know, they were going back and forth between these Dutch punch cutters and the king was like, no, don't like that. And I like that, and I approve that. Very suspicious. Probably there was a committee. I don't think Peter the Great was personally proofing these specimens. But yeah, so you can see here, like, on the left side is the way that Cyrillic looked like before. And on the right side on the page is the way Cyrillic looked after the reform. Or straight after. This was the first sort of civil type. And there's still a lot of unresolved things there. Obviously, because Ustav and Polustav and all the other stuff didn't really have like a proper, there was so much variation. There was not really lowercase and uppercase differentiation. So what they were really struggling with was coming up with uppercase and lowercase different letters. And the result was that of course, they just repeated the same with the uppercase and lowercase, which is why nowadays all the designers are always complaining about how Cyrillic looks like small caps. But to be fair, this was only the start. There was, where's my slide? There's only the start. And a few type, like the civil type, the actual type, like the metal type, didn't last long and but it was just like the starting point. So it's, sorry, go back. It becomes this breaking point. The reason why many of my, especially people who were born with Cyrillic, feel like this very strongly about, civil type ruined Cyrillic, is because it becomes, from this point, this sort of fight between, okay, this is the old style and now this is the new style, and what are we going to do except following what already exists in Latin? But I don't think it's quite the case. This is one of my favorite pages from a Russian textbook about type, which highlights the first few typefaces that were created straight after, or soon after the civil type. And you can already see, even in between them, and I mean, some of them are later, of course, but a lots of variation. And yes, this basically opens doors for foundries in mostly Russia, because a lot of, like, especially there was no production of type in the Balkans at the time, to produce typefaces that are like copies of typefaces that were in Latin. Of course, it was like inevitable. But at the same time, you know, I love looking at these because a lot of these shapes are still, like, they would not be okay today. And they're from the 1800s. So you can see that people were definitely exploring. Designers were, it's like, okay, how are we going to do this weird Latin style in Cyrillic? Does it really work? And then I'm going to jump on to say the reason, well, because I'm going to talk to you about extended Cyrillic, I also have to mention this process of Cyrillisation, which happened in the Soviet Union, which is essentially for all the countries that were not using Cyrillic and were part of the Soviet Union or partnered with, had to be at some point converted to Cyrillic. And all of those languages were like Arabic, Mongolian, very different languages, very different sounds. So a bunch of linguists got involved, and they invented a bunch of extra letters to Cyrillic so that this could fit. And I'm not gonna, it's a very interesting topic by itself. And I'm just gonna show you an example. Like, Soviet Union politics is a very complex, and this is what, like, an entry about what the Abkhazian alphabet went through just between, I don't know, less than 100 years or a bit like 150 years, like so many reforms. It's like before the Cyrillisation, there was like a brief period of time. It's like a fun fact that I also learned quite late, that before the Cyrillisation of the Soviet Union, there was a Latinization topic. And even like at some point, the Soviet Union was thinking about switching to Latin to be even more like modern. But yeah. So what I mean to say is that it's very complex. And there's a lot more characters nowadays that they're included in Cyrillic, and I'm only going to cover a few of them. And of course, I have to talk about the Bulgarian form, but I'm not going to talk about too much about it. But essentially, you know, there was no type creation in Bulgaria, but there was lots of lettering. And in those lettering styles, slowly formed this kind of alternative form of Cyrillic. And I know it's really tricky to even understand it, because I have to talk to you about it, and it's like, I call it the Bulgarian form, and that's just like a visual form of the script, but then it's like the Bulgarian language, and there's like a Russian language, and there's like one script and the other script. So there's so many things that get tricky to talk about. And another thing is that this is not like, completely invented forms for the Cyrillic. These are handwritten forms. So I am going to just from now on focus on like how to design them, and not so much about context. But I felt like you really needed to have a little bit of a rough idea. And yeah, many dramatical historical events and language reforms later, we get to modern Cyrillic. And modern Cyrillic, I mean the Cyrillic nowadays. And so the question is always, what is the basic Cyrillic? And that's the term that I always hated, because in terms of type designers, when somebody comes to me and says, oh, I want the basic Cyrillic, what they mean is I want Russian. And that is the Russian alphabet. But I would argue that this is not really the basic Cyrillic, because it includes these 3 letters that are only specific to Russian. So if we remove that, then maybe we get what truly is basic Cyrillic. And nowadays, if you open glyphs, this is what you get, thanks to Reiner. And then some people might say, oh, but you're just making basic Cyrillic into Bulgarian Cyrillic. But that's not true, because for Bulgarian Cyrillic, you need this character. And also, you need all of these localized forms, which we're going to talk about shortly. So I'm going to talk to you about the character set that I use, which was formed on the basis of how can I include as many languages as I can without covering the full extended Cyrillic, which is more than 200. So how do I cover a lot of languages without killing myself? It's very subjective. But so let's talk about Mongolian, which also has the Mongolian script, of course, but it was part of that Cyrillicization process. So they also have Cyrillic. And you can see the ones in green are just like the ones that are extra from like the Russian. So really, you have no excuse if you have Cyrillic and basic Cyrillic and Latin. It's not that hard. It's just those. Maybe you have to come up with something special in the italic for that shape, because it's not. You can see that it's not like a Y, but it's easy enough to add. Belarusian. You just have the I, which coincides with the Latin I already, and the U with the breve. And I'm going to put like a side note here and say that the first thing I look at when I see a Cyrillic typeface is the breve, the shape of the breve, which is here. And the breve in Cyrillic is different from the one in Latin. So if I see a Latin breve, then I'm like, okay, not looking at anything else, thank you. But you already have this Cyrillic breve for the E, and you just added for the E. So, easy enough. Then you have Ukrainian. And Ukrainian has their specific G shape, which is like and they have the, small mistake, but never mind. The I with 1 dot and the I with 2 dots were supposed to be there. And they have the E, which is shaped here. And this is the Russian E, and I've included these bottom lines just so we can see, if you notice, there's like a difference in a way. So it's not like in a serif, it's not flipped. It's not a flipped version of the Russian one, but it's more like what you have in the C. And yes, you're gonna have to make sure that these I diareses, they do meet each other. The two I diareses next to each other always. And it's, I always have trouble designing this one in italic, the G upwards, because the usual G shape is a bit different, but this one doesn't get italicized in the same way. Yeah, and then you have Kazakh. In Kazakh also they have the Arabic and they have the Latin and they're supposedly using them at the same time, and they're supposedly switching to Latin soon, but I still think it's also not that hard to include it, and I do. I mean, the first few you've already kind of have. This is like an inverted chain, then you have a bunch of spikes. For a sans, especially, it's easy. For a serif, sometimes it can get tricky to add the spike to the K, but still, not impossible. Oh, and I've included this italics because I always, in the italics, the spikes are quite interesting sometimes to make them work. The spikes are these, we don't have really a proper term for this, but it's not a descender. Well, some people call them teeth, but I think teeth is a bit weird. So you have, going back to Serbian, well, going back to the Balkans, and there is Serbian. And Serbian has technically a few, but if you think about it, like the ones in the middle are kind of like a ligature, but they're, well, the technical term is diphthong. It's like a two letter. The top ones are the tricky ones to design. And then this J on the right is just similar to the normal C, but it has the spike in the middle. Usually it doesn't get difficult to design them unless you get into serif italics. But that's generally with everything. It can be tricky. But to answer the most common question is like, oh, do I have to make the H shape connect to the soft sign shape? You don't have to. It's better to keep it the same shape throughout the typeface instead of squish the counters. Macedonian. Macedonian, again, just a few accented characters and an S. Again, quite simple. And then we circle back to Bulgarian, which, as I said, technically is like basic Cyrillic plus this E character, accented E, unless we start talking about localized forms. And then localized forms, but they're basically these days you do them as an open type feature. And the open type feature is pretty well supported in the web and crappily supported everywhere else. And there's lots of different, like the localized forms depend on, also they're not like 100% set, as in like you must, because the red ones, for example, you could have either one in Bulgarian and they will both be accepted. And there's a like there's also a difference between sans and serif. And I cannot go into detail between for all of these. But what you would look and you would think, oh, but this is just like Latin. But it's not like Latin because it's actually handwritten Cyrillic forms. But yes, some of the shapes do coincide with the Latin. And in terms of the big difference between like the default Cyrillic and the Bulgarian Cyrillic, it's in serifs, and the serifs in default Cyrillic are always flat, double-sided, and in Bulgarian Cyrillic they're always like one-sided, like the starting serif of the N. Yes, and then when the italics is also gets tricky because if you have a slanted, what do you do? Or if you have like a true italic, In any case, this is the forms for Bulgarian, no matter if it's like a slanted or a cursive, whereas the default Cyrillic, if you have a slanted, you would not change probably anything. But in italic serif, it's usually a much more of an overlap between what the default Cyrillic has and the Bulgarian Cyrillic form has. So you can see it's only just a few of them have changed in this case. Yeah, and I didn't talk about the Serbian localized forms because they also have that. I actually have a whole lecture at my workshop about this, how to design this Serbian B. And it's a Serbian, so these, this is Serbian and Macedonian, so localized forms for Serbian and Macedonian overlap. And you also have a few extra localized forms for italics compared to Roman. So you have this macron-looking shape, but it's not a macron because you can see that it's like a different length for all the letters. So it's actually like a writing mark. Yeah, so there is a lot more. But this is the usual character set that I recommend when I am working. I thought about including a link, but like if you email me, I'd be happy to share you like a character set, glyphs file, whatever. So it's just about being more inclusive. I'm lucky enough to not be questioned about it most of the time these days, because people come to me for Cyrillic and they're like, oh, we don't know what character set we need, just tell us what we should have. And I usually say, okay, this is the recommended set. And also, I mean, I guess that started when I was working on custom fonts at Fontsmith. There will usually be a company, which is like an international company, and they will come and they will be like, oh yeah, we have these countries that we need to cover, and we have no idea what languages they use, just deal with it. Yeah, so this is kind of like how this character set was built, and together with my colleague Maria Duruli, we both. So it covers a lot more languages than the basic set. And this is probably the most useful slide I've ever created, because I've been meaning to do that for ages, and I never got to it. It was just like based on the languages, which ones refer to which language, because I know, like, because I teach Cyrillic to people who who don't read Cyrillic, and they're like, okay, this one, which language is it for? There's a second. I could not fit it in one. Yeah, two most important slides. Yeah. So obviously you can see here there's other languages that I didn't talk about. But yeah, I can't not finish without a few thoughts and feelings about what to do when you're designing Cyrillic. And yeah, please do test for all the languages that you're planning to support. Figure out which ones are the most important, because it's inevitable that you're gonna, ideally, there is the perfect design system that works perfectly on all scripts, but maybe that's not the case always. Work on a bigger set of characters. If you're only designing the spike characters for one language, you saw that those spikes repeat on many letters. So if you know, oh, I'm gonna have italic serif, maybe I'm not gonna have an extremely decorative spike just because it's not gonna work on 10 letters. Yes. Accept that your Latin focus idea of harmony is not achievable. For you, Cyrillic it's not gonna look, oh, it doesn't have a Sanders and these Sanders. It looks like too much line space. This is it. This is it. You know, this is how it is. It's more about you getting used to looking at Cyrillic text and not about trying to match Cyrillic to your idea of how harmonious text setting looks like. Yeah, certain design features and styles are easier to match than others. You're gonna have a much easier job with a sans and a really hard job with a humanist serif, like an old style. But yeah, that's it, I guess.